Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Facebook. We are in our Facebook studio here at Fox 5. I am joined, I'm going to introduce everybody. My name is Teresa Priolo. I am the host of our Lyme and Reason series, and I want to introduce you to the people that I'm joined with today. First and foremost, we have Lou Leone. He's the big boss around here. He's the reason why we are doing this special. We have Dr. Elena Frid, who is a neurologist and Lyme specialist. Did I get that right? Is that like the, okay, cool. And then we have Chris Desi over here, and he is our social media expert, our social media guru. He's the one helping us make sure we've got everything situated here this morning. Before we get into why we are here today, I want to turn things over to Lou, because you are the reason why we are doing Lyme and Reason 2.0.
So we started our Lyme disease. My wife actually contracted Lyme disease. We got a diagnosis 2 years ago. And we started doing news stories about Lyme disease because we're in an area where it's endemic for Lyme. And the response was good. So we kept doing stories, and they kept getting noticed and picked up, and the social media response was strong. We did so many stories that we figured that this might make a good, be good for a special, for a half-hour special. So what was it, 6 months ago or so? June we did Lyme and Reason, the original, and blown away by the response, not just in the New York market but worldwide, actually, because of the Lyme community. We found it's a community that's really looking for answers. There's a lot of desperate people. It's a large social media community because a lot of them have been overlooked by mainstream medical community, and it blew us away. So I like to joke around. There's two things that really work on our YouTube channel. It's hip hop and Lyme disease.
And the two have not crossed yet.
We do a lot with Empire and hip hop, and that audience is really committed. And our content's been good, and our content around Lyme disease, because of all the experts we've brought in here, and it's been shared like crazy. And the viewership on YouTube, especially, is just for some of the long form content, like even the 30-minute interviews with some of the doctors, it's been incredible. People go and watch that, and so now, and literally, someone calls me every day that has Lyme disease, and they're looking for answers or help or support or recommendations or referrals. The first thing I tell them to do is go to our YouTube channel, watch all that content. It's really good, and then call me back. Okay, after you watch all that, then we can have a conversation, because there's so much that I can tell you right now. I just can't have a 30-minute conversation with everyone that calls. So I tell them to do that first, and I think it's a great resource. It's going to live there forever.
Hopefully.
So will Lyme and Reason 2.0, and in 2.0 we get into things that that I've found through my interactions with people with Lyme is, what happens to your friends and family, what happens to your mental state. People tell you you're crazy, and we saw some of that with Ali Hilfiger and some other people that have suffered with Lyme, especially with neural Lyme. So we attack some other subjects in this special, and we're going to keep at it, because there are no great answers, and there needs to be more research done. Obviously, we need a good diagnostic test, which we don't have. We need more standardized treatment, and then we also need, quite frankly, the government to embrace, especially the CDC. And we have in this special Nicole Green, who actually works for the Office of
Health and Human Services, Division, yeah.
Right. And we actually had our boss here recently, who's going to lose her appointment because it's an appointed position, the Secretary of Health. It's a cabinet position, and hopefully we get someone in that cabinet position that will understand Lyme, and then sort of, because they interact, that cabinet position interacts with the CDC, and hopefully they'll sort of nudge them along. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and there's a lot of support we need from our government. And with that, I've talked enough already. I'll let you turn over.
I think we should tell our viewers. I know you mentioned the fact that you touched on the fact that your wife is actively going through this battle, but you have been our guiding light through all of this. You were the one that said this deserves a deeper look, and so many of us at the station were not familiar with the debilitating effects of Lyme. Maybe we knew somebody here and there that had Lyme, but they got over it pretty quickly. They were a quick case, right? But you were the one, Lou, that said to us, this deserves our time and attention, and it's been through you, through many of your contacts, and with your guidance that we've been able to take this step by step.
Yeah, and you were surprised by the reaction, right?
I was completely blown away, and I initially said this. I said, I feel so ignorant that I didn't know that so many people were struggling with this, and it's only through these reports And through you telling us, no, you're actually not alone in that. I mean, so many people just aren't aware of what a huge problem this is.
Right, or they have a diagnosis, which they may have Lyme and they have another diagnosis. It gets misdiagnosed.
A co-infection of some kind.
Or it gets misdiagnosed all the time.
Yeah.
And that's what we went through. And the typical litany of things that you go through is rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia,
Alzheimer's sometimes?
MS, I mean, there's a whole host of that Dr. Frid can tell you about. But so there may be other people out there that have a diagnosis that's actually a misdiagnosis. So I think that's important too. And I've had some contact from people that said, listen, I thought I had a diagnosis of MS, but it sounded a lot like what you're talking about, and now I have a Lyme diagnosis. So, and that's really important because they can get
it's like a complete flip of the diagnosis.
Oh yeah, and that's very. I hear that story all too often.
Yeah.
So let's bring in Chris and Dr. Frid.
Please turn it over, because I'm going to get.
You have to get out and go do what big bosses do.
Thank you for watching. Thanks for your support in the Facebook world, and keep it coming. And please let us know if there's anything that anything we're missing or anything we should be covering. Thank you.
Lou, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Frid. Thank you, Chris. Thank you.
All right, Lou. Have a good day.
Thanks.
See you later. Okay, so let's bring in you guys to just piggyback off of what Lou was saying. So the intention for 2.0, as we call it around here, is to take the response from the first special, because we've now introduced people to the concept of Lyme, its debilitating effects, the idea that Lyme can be chronic, and the struggle of people, and then push it forward. And we used so much of the social media response that we received with our first special as sort of our jumping off point for this. So first, Chris, I'd like to bring you in to talk about the social media aspect of it. This is something that Dr. Frid and I talked about. You're an expert in this. People are actually going online and using this as a way to diagnose themselves, but also to find people in their community.
I think Lou used a word that struck me, and it's why it's working within social media. And he said his wife felt like she was going crazy, like you feel like you're going nuts, and when you can't find an appropriate diagnosis, people start to conduct research. So how do we conduct research in today's modern world, right? We pull out our mobile device, these mega computers in our pockets, and we start searching. And then there's the next layer to that. So when you start searching, you're gathering intel so that you can figure out what's going on with your body, because you know that something's not right, and perhaps the doctors that you are seeing are missing something. Maybe you haven't seen a doctor, but you're just feeling these symptoms. So that's the first level. The second level is moral and emotional support. And we've found, especially now, I mean, social media has been prevalent in our society probably since around 2007, where certain things happened with the Irish Spring and sort of or the Arab Spring, pardon me, with things that were happening politically and globally, where people were like, okay, social media is a real thing. It's no longer a toy. This isn't just MySpace. You remember MySpace, right?
Which was great for
which
what it
was fantastic. But social media has become so ubiquitous that people were realizing that they can reach out and connect with other individuals that might be suffering the same exact thing. So you're looking for emotional and sometimes spiritual support. And I think that that's why social media, for what you're doing, has struck such a hard chord. It's not about the social media aspect making this big. This was already big. It's just using social media as a tool to connect all the people that are saying, I'm not crazy. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. I think that's a great thing. And it's an opportunity for you guys, what you're doing at the station, to provide value. I mean, to have high level, high caliber doctors come in and give advice and talk about the things that people should be doing in order to help themselves and to maybe help their own community and to deal with it and live with it. I mean, it goes to preventing it, to diagnosing it, to living with it, to potentially curing it, type of a situation.
So doctor, when you hear Chris talk about the power of social media, I mean, you were saying to me, and we air this in the special, patients come to you and say, but I saw this on Twitter, but I saw this on the internet. Does that complicate your job, or does it actually make it easier for you as a physician?
Guess yes and no.
Okay.
The answer to that
Complicated,
is yes and no.
right?
It is a complicated answer because the patients come, these specific patients go essentially from 5, 10, 15, sometimes even more physicians. And so when you as an expert know what they should be on and the path they need to take and the tests we need to do and the treatment they need to be observing now, the social media may complicate that because they'll say, well, I found this patient who did it this way, or this doctor says to do it that way. And so now you're not just convincing the patient and the family, but you have to validate all the time everybody else who is sort of managing the patient's care indirectly. So social media essentially manages patients indirectly from a medical perspective, which is fine if you have a doctor that you trust, but
Right.
is not
Right.
okay
That's a good point.
if you're directing your own care.
So I think the only example that I can, from personal experience, is my father was, it took 2 years, a year and a half to diagnose that he had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, which eventually took his life, unfortunately. However, in the midst of that time period, people were so confused, and he found, and I thought it was interesting that when he originally started his research online, he needed to stop the research online and really up the time that he would spend with neurologists and the doctors and say, okay, I'm going to take my litany of questions and I'm going to sit with the doctor, because I do think that there is just, there's a flip side to everything, and social media reflects us as human beings. And just like there are good human beings out there, there are bad human beings out there. And there are people that will kind of kick up dust and try to terrify everybody, and oh my gosh, it's doomsday. And I think we just need to be adults about it, be mature about it, be intelligent enough that when you read certain things online, to then take that back to your doctor and say, hey doc, I read this, what's the story there? So that was our experience, and the way, it helped our family that way.
But it is, you're right, this is a double-edged sword.
Yes, completely a double-edged sword.
And you see it all the time.
I see it all the time, and to your father's struggle, I'm sorry about your loss. It is important because sometimes they come in, just a typical thing, let's say not Lyme or a chronic illness, but a typical headache. And typically you will have a terrified young person who thinks they have a brain tumor, and there's nothing you can tell them that I don't think you have a brain tumor, short of getting them an MRI to prove it to them so they could sleep better at night, which then the MRI becomes not only diagnostic but a therapeutic tool for these patients. And sometimes you have to do that, but like you said, people put out a lot of information out there, and for some patients, especially the chronically ill patients, because they're struggling so much, it's very difficult to filter things out. And that's why having somebody that you trust in terms of a medical provider becomes a very, very important issue.
Yeah, and I think it also goes back to your point, though, about having a medical provider that you trust. I mean, if you have somebody who you feel like you're in good hands, maybe you're more willing to take a step back and take everything on face value, dig into what you need to dig into, and toss out the rest. But if you feel like you're getting the runaround, if you've been to 100 doctors, or Yolanda Hadid, who we talked to in the special, the reality TV star, said that she went on 106 doctors.
That's incredible.
106. And this is a woman with power and privilege and all the resources in the world. Access. And yet she couldn't get it.
That's devastating.
Yeah, but this is common.
This is why it's so great that what you're doing, because you're bringing light to this disease. And what Lou was saying before, part of the reason why she needed 106 doctors is because she's getting 20 different diagnoses, and each physician is managing that one diagnosis, not understanding that this disease can cause A, B, C, D, E, F, and beyond. And so the complexity of this disease is not understood by a lot of the mainstream medical society, and that's why the patients take it upon themselves to use social media and diagnose themselves, and really a lot of them feel like they're the ones who cured themselves, not the doctor, but they're curing themselves with the help of social media.
I'm curious, so I'd love to know more about what you specify in, like what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, because I feel like we need to just keep you on the YouTube channel. Like sincerely, right? Like talk about like what you do.
Our viewers will be introduced to you in this special and learn a lot more about you. But tell them about your specialty and about your practice and kind of how you got into it.
Okay. It's actually interesting you bring YouTube up because a couple of weeks ago I actually created a YouTube channel for this reason specifically.
The social media expert likes
That's
that.
fantastic. I love it. I love it. I love
Because
it.
I feel like there's a lot of misinformation.
Yep.
And we talked about, I mean, Lou touched on this, how there are certain diseases that are just exploding. For example, ADHD in the pediatric population is a tremendous issue. I have a YouTube video on that I believe not all ADHD patients, however, some of them certainly may have an infectious etiology to their symptoms. And so I actually tweeted on this where I believe that before we start diagnosing patients with ADHD and learning disabilities in school, we should test them for Lyme disease. Why not? It's a simple test that can be done and potentially prevent people from being on medications for a very long period of time that can have a lot of side effects. So what I do specifically, I'm a neurologist by training, and I started my practice in general neurology, but more recently I moved to seeing patients with what I call now infections-induced autoimmune encephalitis, which is a mouthful.
Yeah, how do you put that on a little?
I send
nice
tweets for a
line,
living.
right?
I send.
Right. Oh boy. Okay.
But in the simplified version, essentially I talk about or treat and see patients who have inflammation of their brain caused by an infection that has now developed an autoimmune process, which is when your own body is attacking itself. I think Lyme disease and associated disorders like you mentioned, Babesia, Bartonella, some of the co-infections can certainly trigger this condition, and this condition can mimic a lot of different things that we don't think about, including what Lou was talking about, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, ADHD, depression and anxiety, headaches, some of the degenerative neurologic conditions, including MS, Parkinson's disease, ALS, Alzheimer's, they could be triggered by this type of scenario when it's left undiagnosed and untreated for long periods of time.
It's so fascinating. I'm like, because of my father's ALS, I think it's fascinating because the years leading up to it, it was a back and forth of did he have Lyme disease? He was
Is that something you actually
exhausted.
explored?
We explored everything. He was getting these weird symptoms where he would just be fatigued and tired, and was it Lyme disease? Was it not Lyme disease? And then he had an infection, like a thrush infection, that knocked him out for a bunch of weeks, and then got to a certain point, and then he had heart surgery, and we felt like that compromised his immune system. And then right after the heart surgery, they diagnosed him with ALS, and then they reneged the diagnosis, and then a year later they're like, oh no, it's ALS. But I think it's what got me was the fact that you said that those things can trigger ALS.
Yeah.
That it's not just like, all right, you're predetermined you're going to get ALS. It's like, no, you could have some sort of infection that can shift what's happening in your body neurologically, and because of the infection, then you end up with ALS. And I've always felt that that's what happened to him, and it's fascinating to hear about.
I think you're on the right track.
Yeah.
Where the infection, and typically in my practice, what I would see, I was fine, I was healthy, and then I had an elective procedure, a dental procedure, some minor surgery, and the house of cards kind of fell. Exactly.
So explain that. Why does that happen? What goes on in the, because I'm sure you just scared the heck out of anybody that's watching.
Right,
like, wait a minute, I'm going to get an elective procedure?
Or maybe you validated a lot of the concerns of people who have been like, I just don't
I
feel
knew it.
right.
I didn't feel right after that
What
procedure.
I think it's very important about what you said about your dad specifically is that he didn't really fall into the cookie cutter explanation or cookie cutter diagnosis of any specific illness, which is exactly what I see in my patients. let's say the child is diagnosed with autism, but then they have good eye contact, they can speak, so it's not really autism, we're not really sure, they just had an infection, maybe they had a tick bite or something else, and things kind of got, so these are the type of patients that I would start looking into. And to Lou's point, for example, if somebody is having headaches, okay, and typically I always talk about the fact that 90% of my patients when I did general neurology would get their headaches resolved with 1 or 2 medications and could go back to regular, but then there's a small percentage of patients that I would see, you could throw the kitchen sink at them and nothing was helping. So these are the type of people you start thinking, well, maybe something else is going on, maybe something triggered it, perhaps their immune system is not functioning properly, it's an overactive immune system that's causing some of these things to happen, and your own body is now reacting against you inappropriately.
As you guys talk, I just want to mention that because with Facebook Live, people can ask us questions. We want to just mention your name again and your YouTube channel. They want to write it down as we're all talking.
See that?
There you go. It's working.
What's the she's looking there because she's like, we just started it 2 weeks ago.
Your name is Dr. Elena Frid.
Dr. Elena Frid, and the YouTube channel is Lyme Talk with Dr. Frid.
Lyme Talk with Dr. Frid, right? And you are
right?
Is that
yes.
It's all new. And then you're obviously on the Upper East Side.
Yes.
Okay, so if they need to contact you, they can contact you in your office. Can they contact you through your YouTube channel, or do you have information on there?
They can contact me through Twitter. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram.
Chris is loving
I love it. I love it.
So
It's fantastic. It's
I decided to take the bull by the horns.
See, but this is the first step. It's contact. It's access. That's phenomenal.
Other people are saying they were actually told that they had cancer and then they didn't. And another person said that they had their Shannon said she had her gallbladder removed, and then bam, it was a constant horrible feeling, whereas before it was random and the dots were never connected.
I actually want to make a point on that because Lyme disease people think fever, maybe headaches, a rash, some joint aches, and that's it. Very, very commonly, especially in the pediatric population, but also in adults, they will have a major complaint of abdominal discomfort, and so a lot of my patients will have surgeries like gallbladder removal or just an exploratory laparoscopy because they don't know why they're having so much pain, and all of their workup is normal, but it could be from the infection itself that their abdominal pain is a major issue. So thank you for bringing that up.
Okay, great. Let's also talk about what a patient should do, how they should bring the information to you, the physician, right? So if they're online and they're gathering all this information, then should they bring it all to you sort of in a nice, neat folder? I mean, how does a physician, the reason I'm asking this is, let me just preface this, a lot of physicians are not like you. They don't like to be challenged. They don't want information brought to them that might in any way offset their initial diagnosis. Because we are in a society, rightfully so, that says that you are a doctor. And so you are a doctor, you are on a different level. You have gone through so much schooling, and you are supposed to be essentially a superior in that regard. But you, from talking to you, I know that you are so open, and if somebody brings you something, you're so willing to converse about it. So from a patient perspective, how do you present that information to your physician to get the best possible outcome?
So I do encourage to use social media, but filter
but not that much.
Filter it.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when you have so many symptoms, it's not only overwhelming for you and your family, but it's also overwhelming for a doctor.
Yeah.
Especially if they know not that much about the infection and they're thinking about other diagnoses. So when you go to see a physician, it's good to get your information and ideally come with 2 or 3 specific questions. Don't talk about every little thing that's going on because it becomes very overwhelming. And additionally, let's say you do have a Lyme specialist and you may have an abdominal issue. And let's say your doctor sends you to an emergency room or sends you to a gastroenterologist to work that up. Don't go and talking to them about all your 20 different
Sure.
symptoms. Go to them with a specific question. My doctor wants me to have my abdomen checked out. Could you do that for me? Could this be X, Y, or Z? And have them answer those specific questions instead of kind of overwhelming them with all of the other symptoms that some of them don't understand at all. And so then you become frustrated because your questions are not answered. So that's what I would encourage.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? How important do you think it is in your practice to have a trusted friend or family member with the patient in the room? Because I love that you just said it's crucial, because my father would come in and meet with the neurologist. My father was a strapping, always healthy guy. The guy never had a cold. It just didn't occur to him to be sick.
Which probably made all this so much more shocking.
It was bizarre, but he would never give the full extent of the symptoms, because he would kind of brush this. And I tripped on Thanksgiving, and I remember he tripped going up one step, and my brother and I, years later, we both said when he tripped, we in the back of our minds were like, it's ALS. Because this is a guy that never had an issue like
But
that.
for
It was
a
tiny
simple
little
fall?
step. Simple fall, but it was because of how extreme the fall was. He couldn't get himself, he fell. And he was still a young man. He was still in his early to mid 60s. It was something it was just a bizarre thing. And I kick myself, and I'm like, we were in meetings with doctors, and I should have said he fell, but it was a different kind of fall.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on with the disease, it was even my mother would hold back, and my brother and I would be like, we need to be in the room when they meet with the neurologists.
Mm-hmm.
Because they had this sort of level of almost feeling like it was a personal thing to talk about some of the symptoms that he was experiencing. And I'm like, Dad, you need to tell them that you don't have that feeling in your foot. Let's
But
discuss
that raises a really good point, though. How much information is too much information? Because you as a physician, you said you ask them only a few questions at a time, but now a couple of years later, you're left thinking to yourself, Chris, like, oh my gosh, I should have said this, I could have said this. Would that have gotten us to our end result sooner? Would that have gotten us our diagnosis sooner? But then if you're in the room, especially if you've never gone through this before, you don't know what to say or how to say it. So how much is too much? And that's a loaded question, I know.
It's tough. It's really tough, and that's why I feel for this community. That's why I'm trying to go out there and kind of communicate with them, create good content to give them the tools so that they could go back to their physicians, go back to their families. A lot of times, what a big problem is that I have patients who don't have any support. Their family members do not believe them that they're really going through this. And I have children who one parent believes them that something's going on, and the other parent thinks that they need to be institutionalized in a psychiatric facility.
Like Allie Hilfiger.
Because they went to a neurologist who was not aware of what was going on and is not really kind of Lyme friendly and thinks that it's all psychiatric. And so there's this patient who's devastated and doesn't have support. And a part of this is what actually I saw Yolanda Foster.
Hadid,
Yolanda Hadid.
She's Yolanda Hadid now. We all know Yolanda Hadid.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate what she has done with her platform. I think she shed an important light on this topic. But I was mortified how the housewives on the show were not supporting her. And it really points to the fact how divided this topic is and how controversial it is, that her friends were questioning her diagnosis and her children's diagnosis on the show, despite knowing her for all these years and kind of knowing the family and knowing the kids, and she still got so much grief.
Well, they suggested that she had Munchausen's.
Correct, which is a psychiatric
which is a psychiatric. Yeah, can you explain what that is if people had heard that on the show? Reader's Digest version of it, a simple one.
No. So Munchausen is a psychiatric diagnosis where a patient makes themselves ill or seem ill because they're seeking attention. So they're
making it up.
Right.
And that was a big, obviously, if you watch Real Housewives, which
it's a very serious accusation.
Yeah, it's a very, very serious accusation. But when we talked to Yolanda, she said, "Look, I wish I was selling handbags on QVC.
Right.
I wish that I was doing something that didn't really impact people's life one way or another, but it was fun and fancy.
Right.
She wants to be chasing after her children who are taking over the modeling world, Gigi Hadid, Bella Hadid, Anwar, who are at the top of their game and they're very young. She wants to keep up with them. These are her babies, and yet she can't because she is so ill, but she says she's slowly getting her life back. It has taken, though, this fight and traveling around the world to come to a place where she is finally able to come out of the fog."
Right. And that's actually a very interesting point. I like that you're mentioning that. When I started my practice, how was I introduced to Lyme disease is through patients. So I got a few patients in the area who've been to multiple experts throughout the country, big name institutions, and what they got was, "We think this is psychiatric." They would come to me, young, good-looking, successful people with everything in the world to gain, and were devastated, were losing their friends, their family, their livelihood, and I did not understand what was the incentive for these patients to make this up.
Yeah, there's no reason why this person would be doing
Which
it
is
at
what
all.
you're
There's
talking
no, right.
about in terms of Yolanda as well. She has everything to live for. Why would she make this stuff up? And her children
do you
as
think
well.
that that's why it's so powerful in social media, is because people question the symptoms so quickly?
Yes.
So that's got to be it, right? Like, you feel like, I'm not nuts, and then you stop and you're like, maybe something is going on. Maybe this is psychosomatic. Maybe it's like then you go online to see if other people are experiencing it, and like, oh, I'm not nuts. There are other people that are having this problem.
So on Instagram, I look at some of the stories that people post, and I feel like it's almost cathartic for them to tell the story that this is what they're going through, and the likes and the comments kind of get you going through the day. And so I really appreciate that aspect, because as I mentioned, some people don't have any support.
Sure. Modern day journaling. And if you're journaling and people are supporting you through it and saying keep going, that's tremendous.
And to that point, one of the things that we tackle in Lyme 2.0, and truth be told, we don't go into it nearly as enough as we should, it's such a big topic, is the problem of suicide with Lyme. And there are a range of numbers when it comes to people who have attempted or have unfortunately committed suicide and they had Lyme as a diagnosis. But so many of them, first of all, can't take, they say they can't take the brain fog, the physical ailment, and then they also can't take the sense of isolation. You've given up your entire life. You've shelled everything you've wanted to do because of this, physically and emotionally. So where do they go for support if their family doesn't understand? Social media. Twitter and Facebook especially. Facebook, because you can put sort of a more detailed message on there than just 140 characters. But I know we see that with a lot of other illnesses and a lot of other causes, with bullying and with other things. You turn to Twitter especially.
Of course. I mean, the power of Twitter are the keywords and the search words, so that if somebody can go onto Twitter, they can get very granular with what they're searching for. You can literally just search Lyme and just see what people are talking about. And I think because of the depth and breadth of the content around those keywords, you can be exposed to myriad subjects. So it could be a hospital tweeting about Lyme. It could be a doctor in a private practice tweeting about Lyme. It could be somebody saying, I think I have Lyme disease, I'm not sure. So the layers of exposure to different things without necessarily having specifically sought that out is why it becomes so powerful, because you get exposed to the breadth of content. Whereas, if you look at almost every social platform, it's all pretty much the same, right? Like, there's a news feed. Even like LinkedIn, there's a news feed. Facebook, there's a news feed. Twitter, there's a news feed. But when it comes to the content on Twitter, I think it can be even more powerful, because it tends to be a bit more of a stream of consciousness when it comes to texting and journaling. So that's a good place to start for anybody that's maybe feeling like they're losing their mind a little bit and experiencing the symptoms. I do think Twitter is a good place to start.
I agree. What I use it for, those news feeds, like you were saying, or people forwarding articles,
Yep.
and you just, you like whatever you like, you click on, you can spend more time on it. What you think is not appropriate, you move on. So that it's an easy, quick way.
Everyone should follow the doctor on Twitter, because I'm assuming that anything that you're tweeting, that information is going to be
Hopefully
of
it's
high
right, yeah.
caliber,
Yeah.
reputable, right? Like, so
Right.
it's not junk, and then
I
you
put
could be
thought into
the
it.
central repository, and then we could start retweeting it from her. That's
If
great.
I'm not retweeting something, there's a reason
Yeah,
for it.
right. When media says
So in this-
retweets are not endorsements, your retweets
Right.
are
I was
endorsements.
gonna say,
That's-
my
you
RTs
have to
are
be
not
careful.
endorsements, hers are.
Correct.
Just some questions that people are asking. Let's just go through a few of them. Let me just go. Okay, so Kim Stark wants to know, can Lyme show up years later? I was treated for the infection, but now I'm having abdominal pain like an ache. We want to mention that obviously you are not treating Kim, you don't necessarily know Kim, but generally speaking.
Okay, generally speaking, in my practice, I don't think that just one diagnosis, meaning just one symptom, you should jump to the diagnosis of Lyme. Typically, it's a constellation of symptoms. So we talked about fatigue, headaches, visual problems, mood is not so good, perhaps some muscle aches and pains, some joint aches, and you don't have to have all of these symptoms, but it's usually more than just one problem that people come in for.
But if you're having that stomach pain, is it worth it for her to go back to the doctor who initially treated her and say, Doc, what's up?
Okay, so usually relapses in Lyme disease, I think that's the question, occur very quickly after discontinuing medication, which means that you haven't been treated for a long enough period of time. Typically, if symptoms come back years or many months later, it means that you may have had a reinfection or something else is going on. So it's always worthwhile checking, but you also have to make sure that there's nothing else going on from a gastrointestinal perspective, and that you have a gastroenterologist or a primary care doctor that has looked into it appropriately. You don't want to see Lyme with every little thing, but it's certainly something that you shouldn't rule out if other things were tested negative.
I want to ask another follow-up question, because I'm fascinated by what you do. So you have a social media presence. I love that you have a social media presence, and we're encouraging people to go and follow you on social media to be a source, so that they can potentially curate their own content and share that with their networks. Where do you go on social media
That's a good one, Chris.
for you to source certain information and papers, other doctors that are being published as like a responsible resource?
So I follow a number of people, including Global Lyme Alliance. I think they're a very good source.
Global Lyme Alliance.
And they just had Yolanda Hadid
Right.
at their gala this
Right.
past
Great.
spring. They also honored Bella Hadid. A number of celebrities who have been infected by Lyme are big proponents of that,
Right.
because of all the research and outreach they do.
And I also think that Project Lyme is doing a very good job talking about prevention of Lyme disease, which is a major issue and is not addressed as nearly as much as it should.
Sure.
So I think they're doing a great job. I also follow some UK Lyme organizations. They're having a major issue, as well as Australia.
But in Australia, which is interesting, sorry to cut you off, Australia, it's not recognized.
Fascinating.
It's not, Lyme is not recognized
At all. Like they just
They're-
what, how did it
You
does
can
that
explain
happen?
it.
Is that-
It's very convoluted, and with our first special, because we heard from so many people in Australia, we tried to dig into it. Now, not being a medical professional, I was completely overwhelmed by the fact that they have Lyme-like symptoms, Lyme-like cases, but they don't call it that because it's a different tick. Is that the way it
Right, so
goes?
what happens is they've checked their ticks and they didn't carry Lyme disease. They checked a number of ticks that didn't have Lyme disease. This was years ago, and so they decided that there's no Lyme disease in Australia. And so when you follow...
Okay, but isn't it, but it's the same type, I mean, Lyme disease is because it was the location, right, where they said, okay, it's in
Exactly.
Lyme, Connecticut, I think.
Right.
Right.
But, I mean, so does it really matter that they don't call it Lyme disease? That
Well,
it's
it does
Lyme
if you're trying to
disease?
recognize this as a
Exactly.
global disease.
Yeah, okay.
So
But isn't
part
that
of
crazy?
Part
That is
of the
crazy.
issue is that the name should be changed, but that's a big medical.
Yeah.
That's a big medical issue. That the name.
You can't even get the
Lyme
medical
is-
community
I
to
know.
coalesce around Lyme
Right.
being a chronic issue, let alone changing the name of
Right.
it.
Just
Right,
start a
so-
social media movement, rename it, and say this is what we're gonna call it.
We should.
Right.
Listen.
We should.
Why not?
You started. We'll get in
There
on
you
it.
go. Global change. It starts with us.
So definitely, at least especially here in the United States, I know we have viewers from all over the place, but especially here in the United States, the big one you said is Project Lyme, as well as Global Lyme Alliance.
Mhm.
There are a few others like LymeDisease.org and
Yes. LymeDisease.org is exactly. I actually follow them as well. They do a tremendous job. They feature patients and talk about their struggle again to show people how they can relate, people overcoming their struggles. That's very important. They're also collecting data on patients, which is very, very important. I think that's a big topic that needs to be, so that then we can
Sure.
see if we can rename it, because it's not just Lyme, right? It's a lot of co-infections.
infections, and right, it starts with one.
Exactly.
Let's talk about some treatments. People are asking a lot of questions about treatment. First of all, someone mentioned, do oils work as a holistic treatment? Do they? I know you specialize in Western medicine.
No. Next.
Right. I know you specialize in Western medicine, and I'm sure there's a little rift, right, between the holistic version of things, or Eastern medicine, and Western medicine, and what is the best approach.
Okay.
So let's jump off from there. Talk about merging the two, or which one typically has better results,
Mhm.
or where you stand on the whole thing.
Okay, so in my practice, I believe that holistic approach is appropriate for perhaps managing symptoms. I don't think it's curative.
Okay.
That's all
And
I
when
have
we
to
say
say about that.
when we say
Very
holistic,
well done. Very succinct.
when we say holistic, right? We've done that before.
She's done that before.
When you say holistic, we're talking about oils or different kinds of herbs, or would acupuncture, would that be considered something? I know some people.
Yeah, so acupuncture is fine, but again, it is asymptomatic. It's a symptomatic relief. You're not going to cure your symptoms just by doing acupuncture, oils, or herbs, in my practice. I know that there are some other people who practice otherwise. I see patients who are very, very sick. I have a lot of neurologic issues, and so where I encourage them to perhaps seek that type of help, I think it may help their symptoms, but it will not cure them.
There are two different approaches that you mentioned when we talked to you. I'm going to totally butcher them, and I did when we were trying to talk to her, because they are so technical. One spins something with the blood, and the right. I mean, I was trying, doctor. I didn't do very well in science, but nonetheless, you can tell us. So, I remember the whole war analogy. If you can explain two treatments that you think are really beneficial from your perspective, again, not treating anybody that's here, but
Right.
just from your practice, and what they do.
So when we started this talk, we talked about what I mentioned, infections-induced autoimmune encephalitis, which means, like I said, inflammation of the brain triggered by an infection, and that causes an autoimmune response that essentially awakens your immune system and causes it to fight against your own body. In my case, it's to the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. That's what I address. For these patients, some of them do well with mainstream treatment of these infections, such as with antibiotics, but other people, because their immune system is so out of whack, they need help. And so in my practice, for patients who it's appropriate for, I do prescribe what's called IVIG, which is an immunoglobulin treatment that essentially quiets down the immune system and helps your body clear itself off of these what are called anti-neuronal antibodies that are these, this is the analogy that I brought up.
This is the war. I get war.
Yeah. Simple.
Antibodies
So
not so much.
your body is at war, and so the army personnel are not only fighting the bad guys, but are also fighting the civilians. And so by introducing this treatment, you quiet down your army to stop fighting the civilians, which is your brain and your spinal cord and your nerves, and just attack the bad guys, which is the infection. And so the IVIG helps your immune system to kind of straighten out and fight what needs to be fought and leave everyone else alone.
Did you get that?
Perfect analogy.
Right,
and
I know.
got it, and I'm a meathead, and that was great. That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, right.
I understood that one. That was good. So I have another question from a different side, and I don't even know if we want to go down this side, but I'm very curious because, and again, just based on my own experience with my father's ALS diagnosis, my father's neighbor in their same town was diagnosed with a different neurological disease and passed away expeditiously within an hour. Within a year, pardon me. Got a neurological disease, passed away. My dad, like 6 months later, got ALS and then passed away a few years later. And we were discussing the fact that we're like, isn't that odd that it was in the same neighborhood, and did it have something to do with the well water and the fact that, you know, they had to blast stone when they built my parents' house, and maybe it released gases into the ground, and maybe it was, you know, we're talking about all these different chemicals, and I'm interested to hear your opinion about whether you think the rise in what we're seeing for Lyme disease has to do with environmental things, like that it's, you know, toxins that were that perhaps if the environment were different, if we would have been introduced to a disease like this, would our immune systems be able to handle it better if we weren't living in New York City, for example? If we were in a, you know, if the air was pure, or if you kind of can't speculate that way and just be like, listen, it just is what it is and we're dealing with it.
Right. It's an interesting point. I do talk about environmental issues to my patients as well, and I do think it's an issue in these patients because their immune system is under so much stress. And I think that it may worsen their condition, but it's not the trigger.
Got it.
I think the trigger was the infection. Right. And then if you were exposed, for example, to the same toxin, your body would be able to handle it if it wasn't fighting all these other things. So I think it's one of those, it's kind of like an added approach where one thing on top of the other causes everything to fall down.
Do you think this is why it frustrates our society so much for being diagnosed with a disease like this, because it's so not black and white?
Exactly.
That there's so many layers to it? Because I found myself with my father's diagnosis just asking the doctors, like, how did this happen? And they were, well, because of this and that and the other thing. And I think it's exactly the same with Lyme disease, where it's like you're exposed to it, then it's your immune system, and then I feel like that's a psychological thing that frustrates us as human beings, that we just want to say,
you want the answer.
It's that, stay away from it, and then you're fine.
Yeah.
And because there isn't that we get apoplectic almost, like we can't take a step forward.
I think you're exactly right. I think that's why social media did so well there, because there are many more questions than answers. And I think most people in this community, meaning the Lyme community, from the physician perspective, don't understand the complexity of this problem. And thinking that one pill is going to cure you, in my mind, tells me that that person does not understand the complexity of this disorder.
Comprehension of it, It's fascinating.
It's very multifactorial. It affects many different organ systems. It needs to be addressed from many different directions, and I think having a team approach is very important. And where one doctor, let's say your Lyme literate doctor, could be the team leader, but you'll definitely need other physicians helping along, because there's so many other things going on, family and friends, and whatever your outlet is, you know, if it's Facebook, if it's Instagram, whatever you need to kind of get through that, because you brought up the issue of suicide, which is a major issue not only in Lyme disease. Chronic illness is a big problem with suicide. But part of the reason it is a problem in Lyme is because patients feel helpless. Which they don't know any answers. No one's able to help them. Everyone is telling them it's in your head, and it literally is in your head. But they're kind of not using that term properly.
It seems to me that one of the ways where this situation is going to turn around is through the power of social media, it's the response on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and on, and younger doctors. I mean,
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but with an older and aging medical population, they have such a wealth of knowledge. They are so fantastic because they have lived through and seen so much at a time where people maybe weren't running to the internet to diagnose, right? You had to do it. And then you kind of learned that way. However, with these new illnesses, new diseases, new issues, if they're not being taught in medical school, the younger population is the one, I feel like the younger population of doctors is the one that's going to usher the new change with social media.
I think it's also indicative of what's happened in social media when it comes, this is going to sound silly as a odd analogy, but for brands, like when I'm working with brands, 10, 15 years ago, it was the brand message was the brand message was the brand message. Now the consumer is in control and the consumer is driving the conversation. I think the next, like, it's the young doctors, but it's also the patient driving what's happening next, right? It's the patient saying, here, like, advocating for themselves and being comfortable with advocating for themselves. And I think that that's a wonderful thing with social media, is that people feel comfortable advocating on a platform and saying, here's what I'm going through, here's how I'm experiencing it, these are the treatments that I need, these are the doctors that I trust. So I think it's just like a compounded. So it's good. I think that there's a light at the end of that tunnel, right?
I agree. It's giving them a platform, and although they're at home and some of them are so debilitated that they can't leave their house, it's still giving them a voice. I mean, I'm looking at these pages, they have thousands of followers.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands,
Yeah,
hundreds of thousands.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Where would you recommend that people direct their energy in terms of helping to expedite for a cure or raising money somewhere? Because I felt, you know, my father was diagnosed with ALS prior to the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge.
Which was huge,
which
in
was
terms
tremendous.
of...
It was just phenomenal. And when it came out, I remember asking my dad, because he was on the, I mean, it was soon after that he passed away. I remember asking him how he felt about that, because it became so commercialized, and the people that were doing it, I'm like, do they even know what ALS is? And they're just doing it because it's this thing. And my father loved it. He was like, anything to raise awareness and raise money. And the money was going to the right places, and I became very active with the ALS Association of the Greater New York area and was advocating for them and doing walks and leveraging my social ecosystem to get people to raise money and to donate. And I ran the marathon and trying to. How would you recommend for somebody that says, maybe it's me that has it, but maybe it's a family member or a friend that has it, and you know, I feel helpless, I'm not going to start a Facebook page for them, but what can I do today to move things forward? What are the organizations that you recommend that people raise money for and do things like that for?
So like I said, I'm a big proponent of prevention. So that's why I like what Project Lyme is doing. I also really like what Global Lyme Alliance is doing. I actually was talking to Lou before we started that I wrote a letter to the upcoming administration wanting to advise the Trump administration on Lyme disease. And
Wow.
Great.
Wow.
because I feel that if we continue going on the same path, nothing will
Nothing gets
change.
done.
Exactly. So like you were mentioning, it's essentially the older way of thinking that keeps propelling our organizations, and we're basically, I mean, honestly, they've had their chance. They've almost had it for 50 years. 1970 when Lyme disease was diagnosed. It's almost 50 years. And we're still struggling with this issue, and more and more people are being diagnosed with it every year. Over 300,000 new cases per year. That's more than HIV and AIDS annual rates at the peak of their epidemic in the 1980s. And we're 5 times more than that.
Dr. Frid for Surgeon General?
Yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know about Surgeon General, but I would love to advise on this issue specifically.
Well, I think there are so many different things that we can talk about, and this conversation can go on and on. Tonight's special, we do it what we did with the first one in terms of trying to parse apart different issues that we feel as though would really resonate with the Lyme community, but also, and this is important to mention, resonate with people who don't have Lyme, because it's our belief that we're not medical professionals, so I can't advise somebody on treatment, but if I can, or we can get people to understand this really is a battle that people are fighting on a day-to-day basis, and perhaps a little bit of compassion could go a heck of a long way, then that's what we can do. If we can educate and help people be more compassionate and help those people who are suffering know that we're not discrediting their journey, that we're just trying to bring a little bit of awareness. Maybe that's our contribution as people who don't have Lyme.
Yeah.
Because you are already making such a major contribution by helping to treat those people. So we'll go through that tonight. Lyme and Reason 2.0, Lyme Disease and Voices of Change. That's 10:30. It will re-air in December as well, which will alert everybody to. But before we go, just please give your information, where people can find you and all that.
So my name is Dr. Elena Frid. I'm a neurologist. I practice on the Upper East Side in New York. And as I mentioned before, I have a YouTube channel, Lyme Talk with Dr. Frid, and I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. So follow me.
Find her.
That was really well done.
Yeah.
That's good.
And Chris does not run her social media account, but maybe he will.
I want to now. Like, let's do it. I'm Chris Desi, CEO of Silverback Social. We're a digital marketing agency. If you search Chris, CHRISDESSI, on any social platform, you will find me on Instagram, on Twitter, on Snapchat, everywhere.
And they're both really big deals. They're not going to tell you that, but I'm going to tell you that, okay?
She's definitely a big deal. Like I said, I send tweets for a living. This woman is very
He
intelligent.
advises major companies as to how to do exactly what we're doing, though, which is fantastic. So thank you guys. Appreciate it. Hopefully you'll watch our special. Hopefully everybody that's watching on Facebook will watch our special as well.